Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you very much for your welcome, everybody. We're just going to have a very relaxed time together. I'm going to read some stories. They're stories from this book that's just come out, Faith, Hope and Mischief. But as with all bedtime stories, you know, if you want to have a glass of wine, if you want to close your eyes, if you need to nod off, that's all absolutely fine. And I'll read two or three stories. They're all different stories. Some of them are quite short, some of them a bit longer. I'll read two or three stories and then perhaps we'll have a break and chat together, and then maybe a couple more stories, and we'll have about an hour or so together if that's all right with you. They're all very different stories. The one thing they all have in common is that they're all true and they're all about me. They're all coming out of my experience, but some of them are from a long time ago and some of them quite recently. At the end of each story, I'll just say thank you as a little sign that that's the end of the story, and then we'll move on. And I think everybody is muted at the moment, so we'll keep it that way for now. Otherwise, we hear everybody's doorbells going and dogs barking. But after a bit, we'll unmute so that we can have a chat together. The first story I'd like to tell you actually goes back to that time about 18 months ago when I accidentally hit the headlines a bit. And this is a story that I call You Are My Friends. I usually wake up to the Today programme on BBC Radio 4. On the morning of the 15th of March last year, I woke up to the news of terrible events in Christchurch, New Zealand. A young man had walked into two mosques during Friday prayers. He was carrying 5 guns. He'd carefully decorated each one with Tipex, with slogans and symbols representing white supremacy. He shot 51 people dead and wounded 49 others. Then he got in his car and set off for a third location. He was arrested before he got there. Christchurch is known as a fairly tranquil city in a relatively peaceful country. It's about 12,000 miles from Manchester, where I live. I've never been there, and I don't suppose I ever will, but my first thought when I heard the bulletin was that if this could happen in Christchurch, it could happen anywhere. I wondered how the people who gather for Friday prayers at my local mosque in Levenshulme might feel this morning. Angry? Mistrustful? Afraid? I couldn't stop thinking about them all morning. At about 11:30, people will be leaving work and heading toward the mosque for Friday prayers. I thought I would walk there too. I wasn't quite sure why, I just felt like I wanted to be with them. But as I was leaving the house, I wondered what on earth I would do when I got there. I thought I might look a bit silly just standing in the road and grinning. So I grabbed a piece of cardboard, an old file hanger as it happens, and I wrote a message on it. You are my friends. I will watch while you pray. I read it back to myself. The idea of watching while someone else prayed sounded a bit creepy. So I stuck a piece of paper over it and tried again. You are my friends. I will keep watch while you pray. That was better. Then I set off. When I got to the mosque, people were starting to arrive. I stood outside with my sign. It's a big mosque with several hundred worshippers. I was struck by how much of a rush people were in as they arrived, just like my own church, I thought, with people hurrying in during the first hymn. Some looked a bit wary when they saw me standing by the entrance. Perhaps they thought I was some kind of protester or an evangelist hoping to convert them. When they saw the card, some of them smiled, but most just walked straight past me. I stayed at the gate for about an hour and a half until people started to leave. When the worshippers came out, everyone wanted to shake my hand and thank me and share salam with me. Someone even took a photo of me with my cardboard sign. It turned out that the imam had seen me as he walked into the mosque and had mentioned me in his sermon. For a day that had started with such bleak news, it was a lovely atmosphere. A man outside the mosque was cooking chicken biryani, and he gave me a foil box full of it, so that felt like a win. Then I toddled off home to get on with my day. The man who took the photo uploaded it to our community website with a message saying, "Who is this guy?" As the day went on, I discovered that the picture was being shared widely on the internet, and not just on our local Facebook page, not only in the UK either, but around the world. I started to get messages by email and Twitter from strangers. At first, I replied to each message as it came in. Then they started coming faster and faster. By the end of the afternoon, they were coming so fast I couldn't even keep up with reading them. Beside the personal messages, there were likes and retweets and Facebook posts, literally millions of them, all sharing the picture, the one on the front of the book. By tea time, I was starting to realize that I'd gone, if not viral, then at least fungal. I didn't post anything on social media myself, though my daughter posted a nice message saying she was proud of me. In the next few hours, my picture was retweeted with warm messages from the weirdest range of people, from Jada Pinkett Smith to Monica Lewinsky. And the snowball kept rolling down the hill faster and faster. Within a few hours, I was getting messages from journalists and radio and TV stations in every country you can imagine, from Turkey, Egypt, and Bangladesh. Who was I? Why had I done this? Would I be prepared to give them an interview? I had to decide quickly how I was going to respond. I thought the best thing was to roll with it. So I made a decision that I would say yes to everyone except Piers Morgan. And that's what I did. On the Saturday, I did interviews back to back by phone, by Skype, in TV studios. When Saturday evening came, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But then Australia and New Zealand started waking up and getting in touch. The attacks were in New Zealand and the attacker had come from Australia. Perhaps the greatest privilege of all was to speak to the people of Christchurch, New Zealand, via their local TV and radio stations. I was able to say that we in Manchester know something of what they're feeling because we've had our own atrocities, but we also know that friendship can overcome fear. On Monday, I had a message of thanks from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the wonderful Jacinda Ardern. The Secretary General of the United Nations mentioned me in a speech about reconciliation, and so did a minister from the UK Foreign Office. Over the next few days, I received in excess of 50,000 individual messages. They came from almost every country in the world, from Hyderabad to Hollywood. The photo was copied tens of millions of times. In 24 hours, my Twitter followers went up from about 3,000 to over 15,000. Now, usually I regret about 1 in 3 of my tweets, but I realized I'd need to start being more careful what I said. I became the subject of sermons and school assemblies and radio phone-ins. The responses were overwhelmingly positive, although, of course, there were a few unpleasant ones. I was raised in the Scottish Parliament as an example of the need for social media platforms to censor abusive messages, though to this day I haven't been able to find the abusive messages that they were referring to. 1 or 2 people asked what exactly I was planning to do if a gunman had approached the mosque. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about that. Armed with a file hanger and a flat cap, I made a pretty inadequate vigilante, but the point was to be there, and everybody visiting the mosque seemed to understand that. Amongst the negative messages, one common complaint was, "Are you going to stand guard outside every mosque in the world then?" To which my answer was, "No, I'll stand outside my local mosque, and you could stand outside yours." Indeed, people from other cities around the world started to do just that. I was sent pictures of people standing outside mosques in their own cities, some of them with signs saying, "You are my friends, I will keep watch while you pray." One lovely couple in Reading had even written their sign on an old file hanger, as if that was a key part of the plot. Another common message in the negative pile was, you wouldn't find Muslims protecting churches if it was the other way round. But in fact, the following month, when a church in Sri Lanka was attacked by a Muslim gunman, groups from mosques all around the world did just that, standing outside their local churches in solidarity. My family will confirm that I was bemused by the whole experience. The whole thing was unplanned, unexpected, and completely disproportionate. The simple message I had tried to pass on is that friendship overcomes fear. Hatred doesn't generate itself. It's a byproduct of fear, fear of someone who's just slightly different from me. Some of the stuff that happened was a bit bizarre. A woman from Essex knitted a puppet of me holding my sign. An artist in Dorset painted me in oils. A man in New Zealand drew a cartoon picture of me on the side of a paper cup. I got some lovely offers too. The picture was particularly big in Turkey, apparently, and a generous guy there offered to ship me over so that he could buy me a drink. A Muslim dentist in the Midlands wrote to say that in gratitude for my actions, he would like to offer to whiten my teeth for free, which is a pretty backhanded compliment, really. I'm still reflecting on what has happened and is continuing to happen. I wasn't expecting to be interviewed on Voice of Islam radio or bad-mouthed by far-right groups or discussed on Loose Women. I'm aware that all the nice things that were said to and about me, and all the not so nice things, were not actually being addressed to me personally, but to the action and what it symbolized. One of the themes to emerge from the tens of thousands of messages I've received is that Muslims in the UK and elsewhere live with a mild but perpetual undercurrent of threat. It's like a buzzing in the ears, varying in intensity according to context, but requiring constant vigilance. Of course, others also live with similar kinds of anxiety. Perhaps we all do, though as a white middle-class man in the UK, my threat level is almost inaudible. For others, it's like the relentless hum of tinnitus. Unwittingly, my tiny action and the message on my card seemed to have suggested to people that I understood the impact of this level of persistent fear. The word Islamophobia suggests a fear of Muslims, but the effect is to generate a fear in Muslims. And both sides of this unholy equation need to be dealt with. What people seemed to respond to was an image of an ordinary looking bloke wearing a flat cap and a jumper, doing something a bit transgressive. I'd jumped over the fence and gone onto a neighbour's territory. That was exactly what the Christchurch gunman had done, except that where he went with guns and hatred, I went open-handed and smiling. Some people thanked me for taking a risk. What risk? A small risk of rejection, perhaps, the possibility of being misunderstood, but you can't start a friendship of any kind without taking small risks. If I had had any idea when I woke up that morning that my picture was going to be shared around the world, I would at least have brushed my hair. It's nice when someone sends you a message saying, "You are a symbol of the world I want to live in." It's nice when someone shouts "hero" at you in the street or stops you in Asda and asks for a selfie. Nice, nice, but also weird nice. I'm just trying to roll with it. Tomorrow, it'll all be forgotten, probably. Thank you. That's the end of my first story. Thank you so much. So lovely to be with you this evening. I'm going to tell another story, and this one is from a little bit further back in time and quite a different context, but also something that I found myself accidentally caught up in. This is a story that I call The Battle of Adswood Library. Throughout the 1990s and beyond, I lived with my family on a downtown housing estate called Adswood in South Manchester. Adswood wasn't one of those huge estates that get a lot of attention. To be honest, it hadn't got much going for it. It was just an island of deprivation in the sea of mediocrity that is Stockport. But the friends and neighbours that I met in Adswood were beautiful people, and they've left a mark on me more than anyone I've ever met. I stood out like a sore thumb in Adswood. I was working at the BBC at the time, and every day I would go out in the morning and come back onto the estate at night carrying my massively untrendy briefcase. I learned that some of the children assumed I was a doctor. It was a fair assumption, as no professional people actually lived on the estate. Not the social workers, no teachers, not even the vicar who had a large detached house a couple of miles away. Adswood was a rough and ready place to live. We saw many people move onto the estate and move straight off again. When we first moved there, one of the local councillors said to us, "The trouble with Adswood is it doesn't have a voice." The one thing that Adswood did have was a library. I say a library. It was just a single room with bookshelves and a friendly librarian. Older people from the estate would meet there for coffee during the day, and kids who lived in overcrowded houses went there after school to do their homework and get help from the friendly librarian. Then the local council decided that Adswood Library needed to close. Nothing spiteful, just the usual cost-cutting exercise in the town hall. Who needs a library in a place where people don't even have books in their own homes? When the news filtered through, most of the residents just accepted it as inevitable. One of the strategies that many Adswood people used to get through life was simply not to entertain hope. If you don't hope for things to be better, you don't get hurt when they turn out worse. The politicians knew this, and it made Adswood an easy target. Still, for a few people, the loss of Adswood Library was too much to take. They wanted to fight for it. Soon, a little protest group formed. "We've got to keep the library open. What can we do to make the council change its mind?" Some people wanted to chain themselves to the railings or lie down in front of the bulldozers, but we were afraid people would just say, "Well, what can you expect from Adswood people?" We knew that the battle for Adswood Library was a battle we were most likely to lose, so we decided that whatever we did needed to be fun. We chose our weapons carefully: laughter, mockery, mischief. First, we had to get noticed. So we invited children's authors to visit Adswood Library to give book readings. Amazingly, some very high-profile people came, and the local paper, which had only come to Adswood for stories about drugs and crime before, was delighted to print pictures of happy children in a packed library. Still, we needed to up our game. We needed to get Adswood Library onto the front page. So we wrote to the authors of the most borrowed books and told them what was about to happen to the library. Without exception, they wrote supportive letters back. Jilly Cooper and Spike Milligan, Geoffrey Archer and Alan Bennett, they all signed up for the battle for Adswood Library. Roger McGough even wrote us a poem, The Ballad of Adswood Library. Their letters took us to a new level of publicity. But the more we embarrassed them, the more the council dug their heels in. The leader of the council went on to national radio and gave a massively patronising interview. "These people in Adswood have no understanding of money," he said. "They just don't know how difficult it is for councillors to juggle the books." So the next week, we hired a juggler. We invited all the local councillors to come to Adswood Library for a lesson. They didn't come, of course, but the following week, the front page of the Stockport Express was a full-page picture of Adswood Library with a man in a clown costume teaching a group of children how to juggle books. The councillors were not impressed. The council leader came to my house at night to persuade us to back off. Stockport Council's struggle to close the library was being noticed elsewhere, she said. They were becoming a laughingstock. She even offered my wife a seat on the council if we would give up the battle for Adswood Library. We didn't. Membership of the library was growing. It was now the busiest library in Stockport. Pretty much everyone on the estate had a ticket. And that gave us an idea. One cold morning in October, when the librarian arrived to open the library, she found a huge queue outside. The whole estate had descended on the little library with their tickets. Now, in our area, you could borrow up to 10 books on one ticket. If you're a single parent with 3 children, that's 40 books, which is virtually a shelf full. And there were scores of us. Mums were coming up with buggies and going away loaded up with books. The local vicar turned up to lend support and went away with 10 Jackie Collins novels. I picked out 10 Judith Krantz books, mainly because they were good and thick, almost 2 feet of solid books on one ticket. As battles go, this was fun. There was a party atmosphere. The librarian was delighted to be so busy. The council couldn't really object because, after all, we were only doing exactly what you're supposed to do with a library, borrowing the books. Only we borrowed them all at once. Every single one of them. By the end of the morning, the library shelves were empty. It was a celebration of books, of community, of the fact that we were just plain right to want to keep our library open. We made sure the TV cameras were there to record it. And the next day, we were on the front page of most of the national newspapers as the community that borrowed its library. The councillors were furious. They set a date for the library to close. It looked as if we had lost the battle for Adswood Library. The night before the day that the library was due to close, we broke the law for the first and only time. After dark, we broke into the building. To be honest, breaking and entering was a local skill that we'd probably underused in the campaign thus far. We went to the inner door that led to the library and squirted a tube of superglue into the lock. Then we changed the screws on the handle for clutch screws so that it couldn't be removed. In the morning, when the librarian arrived at 8:30 to open the library for the last time, she couldn't get in. She called her bosses, who called a locksmith, who came and opened the library. The council sent 2 burly security guards to the building to make sure it stayed open. When the press and the TV cameras arrived, we were able to point out that the council that thought it was so important to keep the library open today was going to close it for good tomorrow. Still, the battle for Adswood Library was lost. But we had won some significant victories. Now, when the councillors said, "The trouble with Adswood is, it doesn't have a voice," we were able to say, "The trouble with Adswood is, no one's listening." Now, there is a postscript to this story. Just a few yards from the library, there was a roundabout with a road junction where young children used to cross the road to get to school. Cars would come round the corner at speed, and there had been several nasty accidents or near misses. Residents persuaded the council that they should install a Pelican Crossing, a pedestrian crossing controlled by traffic lights. They duly installed the traffic lights and painted the lines on the road, but due to a dispute between the council and the electricity board, they never actually switched on the lights to control the crossing. Consequently, the crossing was more rather than less dangerous than it had been before. One morning, just after school drop-off time, parents and babies from the estate gathered at the crossing with their buggies and trolleys. At a given signal, they all walked into the road and stopped halfway, making the road completely impassable. Traffic started backing up in both directions with angry drivers hooting their horns. After a few minutes, the queue was best part of a mile long. Then the police arrived. We explained why we were protesting. They were very polite and sympathetic, but they said that if we didn't leave the crossing, they would have to start making arrests. We agreed to go, but we had another plan up our sleeves. We had asked each child to bring a favourite soft toy to the protest with them. As we walked off the road, each child left a teddy or a cuddly toy behind. A furry roadblock, a picket line of cuddly animals where the crossing should have been. We stood at the side of the road, but the traffic wouldn't move. No one wanted to be the first to drive over the teddies. We took photos, of course, and sent them to the press. They loved it. The council hated it. Now, I wish I could say that no cuddly toys were harmed in the protests, but in truth, I can't. Truthfully, they all survived unscathed except one, a multicoloured dinosaur called Daisy. Sadly, she was caught under the wheels of a 310 bus and lost an eye. Still, she bore her injury with pride and was forever after lauded in the community as a hero. But the mighty councillors of Stockport had learned their lesson. They didn't want another Adswood Library on their hands. The next morning, the traffic lights were connected and the crossing was safe. Adswood had found a voice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Now, in the middle of that, I saw a message flash up from Tony, Alison, Will, Maddie saying, "Careful, mate, I grew up in Stockport." Who was that? Somebody prepared to admit to it?
There they are.
I can't see at the moment. Oh, there you are in the middle. You grew up in Stockport. Did you know Adswood?
You can speak if you like, Tony.
If you think that's awkward, I gave a reading last week of that story to the collected librarians of Stockport.
Yeah, I
cheering.
From Stockport. Yeah.
You were from Stockport, Tony. Whereabouts?
Edgeley.
Oh, just close by. Know it well. A big Stockport County fan myself.
Yeah, those were the days. I mean, what on earth has happened to Stockport County?
Oh, that's a long story which we could lament over for ages. But speaking of long stories, I'll tell you another. Not quite so long, actually. And this one, I think, probably goes back. Yeah, I think this one probably goes back the furthest of all the stories in my book. This one is called Crossing the Road. By coincidence, Crossing the Road. When I was in my mid-20s, I was a youth worker in County Durham. The miners' strike was drawing to a bitter close, and I was trying to work out how the gospel I'd learnt on Saturday nights at my university Christian Union could make any sense to teenagers in an ex-pit village outside Chesley Street, whose chances of ever getting a job, let alone going to university, were about the same as my chances of becoming a coal miner. Out of the blue, I was invited to a conference in London. It was called the Senior Evangelical Anglican Leaders Conference. No one loves a meaningless acronym like Senior Evangelical Anglican Leaders. I honestly didn't know why I was invited, since I was none of those four things, but I was still trying to work out who I was, and I was flattered to be asked, so I went along. The conference was held at Westminster Chapel in London. It's an austere Victorian building with a wide frontage that opens directly onto a narrow London street with a slim pavement, just a couple of 100 yards from Buckingham Palace. The whole church was packed with senior evangelical Anglican leaders, about 1,000 of them, the great and the good of evangelicalism. Someone once said to me that if you could see now every sausage you're ever going to eat, you would never touch another one. I feel the same about senior evangelical Anglican leaders. They're fine one at a time, but 1,000 of them all together turn out to be quite hard to stomach. It turns out that senior evangelical Anglican leaders are about 98% men, at least they were back then. It felt a bit like I expect heaven will feel if your idea of heaven is 1,000 clean-shaven white men in black shirts and British Home Stores jackets singing Graham Kendrick songs on repeat. I felt like a lion in a den of Daniels. I sat on a pew at the back on the far left. I hadn't chosen it for political or theological reasons, but with hindsight, it seems quite appropriate. The chairman was the Right Reverend Michael Bourne, the Bishop of Chester, and the main attraction was Dr. George Carey, the recently appointed Archbishop of Canterbury. I remember the bishop giving his boss a long introduction that seemed more like a grandfather giving unsolicited parenting advice to his son. Now that they got their man into the top job, the delegates were keen to impress on him how important it was that he didn't let them down. Eventually, the Archbishop got up to speak. He'd hardly opened his mouth when there was a crash of splintering wood at the back door behind me. There was some sort of scuffle going on in the lobby. One or more bodies crunched through the wooden doors of the church. There was shouting and whistles blowing. The IRA's mainland bombing campaign was at its height, so most people of my age were used to being evacuated from buildings or even hearing bombs going off, and my heart raced a bit. But I figured that if this was my time to catch the bus to heaven, I stood a chance of stowing away with 1,000 senior evangelical Anglican leaders. If you're going to die, die next to the Archbishop of Canterbury. The next minute, the doors at the back of the church burst open, and a dozen men in black jeans and white t-shirts made their way down the aisle. Some were blowing whistles, and the others were chanting rhythmically, "Church of hate, church of fear, stop crucifying queers." It was the human rights campaigner, Peter Tatchell, and some colleagues from Outrage, a group that had a public reputation for outing gay bishops. I remember thinking, Church of hate, church of fear, stop crucifying queers. That doesn't actually rhyme. They made their way to the front of the church, but there was only one set of steps up to the platform, and they were blocked by a junior bishop, intent on martyrdom or perhaps hoping for promotion. So instead of going onto the platform, Peter Tatchell and his friends stood in a line across the front of the church, chanting. The atmosphere was pretty tense. The Archbishop had left the podium looking flustered and was sitting with the dignitaries on the stage. A loud voice from somewhere near the front started to pray that God would remove the enemy from our midst. They were quite literally trying to pray away the gay. At that point, the Bishop of Chester stood up at the lectern. He had the considerable benefit of a microphone, and he said to the assembly, "Let's sing 'Shine, Jesus, Shine.'" So whilst a dozen gay protesters in jeans and t-shirts shouted that they were being crucified, 1,000 vicars sang a cappella at the tops of their voices that the light of God's love was shining, filling this land with the Father's glory. The protesters couldn't compete. They made their way up the side aisle and out of the building, from the shadows into the radiance of the sunshine outside. There was no doubt that the senior evangelical Anglican leaders had won this round. I caught one young protester's eye as he walked out, and I recognized the look of brokenness mixed with defiance. I'd seen it in the eyes of many young people in my ex-pit village in the northeast. I can't remember what the Archbishop's talk was about or how it was received. It didn't seem to matter anymore. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. When it was finished, we all filed out through the splintered back doors. Peter Tatchell and his few companions were standing immediately opposite the building on the other side of the road. They weren't chanting anymore. The police had penned them behind metal barriers. It meant that as we walked out of the building, each senior leader momentarily found themselves looking directly into the eyes of the protesters no more than 20 feet in front of them. As we gaze on your kingly brightness, so our faces display your likeness. 1,000 evangelical leaders, and every last one had to make a choice. As you left the building, you could turn right towards Buckingham Palace, or you could turn left towards the bars and cafes of Westminster. Left or right, sheep or goats. Or you could walk straight ahead to where a dozen queer men were holding makeshift posters saying that you were crucifying them. By the blood I may enter your brightness. Search me, try me, consume all my darkness. Almost every one of us turned either to the left or to the right to disappear into the local cafes or head for the tube. Just 3 people didn't turn left or right, but walked straight across the road to meet the protesters. One was John Gladwin, then the provost of Sheffield Cathedral. The second was Michael Vasey, a gloriously gay evangelical leader whose blue Homburg hat and red felt blazer stood out in the sea of black jackets and dog colours in the midst of the darkness shining. And then there was me, understanding for the first time the connection between my jolly university faith and the downtrodden young people of the pit village in Chester Street. I knew that if I didn't cross this road now, nothing about my Christian faith would ever make sense again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. For anyone who's just joined us more recently, I'm just telling one or two stories from this new book, which is called Faith, Hope and Mischief, which you can get from booksellers or online places. It's got about 20 stories in it and also some little bits of explanation in between.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can I just say, I mean, I know it's quite difficult to show appreciation on Zoom. If you haven't discovered the reaction button, then on the bottom, if you're on a laptop, on the bottom, there's a little sign that says reaction. And you'll find there an opportunity to do this, or this, or this. Do feel free to use those. And
I didn't know that.
Express your appreciation. You can even do this actually, which is very exciting.
Well. So there isn't anything nastier there, is there? There isn't one way it puts 2 fingers up at you or something.
You could weep. But anyway, I mean, thank you, Andrew. So I mean, I know that if you were with us in person, there would be a ripple of applause and a real, and so thank you for those stories. And so I just wanted to stop you because I felt you didn't want to feel you were speaking into a vacuum. And
That's
so
very
we're
kind.
very much appreciating.
That's very kind.
Stories.
Shall I tell one more story and then we'll stop and perhaps have a chat together? And people,
Great.
some may have comments to make or questions to ask. You can't throw things on Zoom, but if you've got things that you wanted to say, I'd be very happy to hear them. I'm quite sure that if we all got together, we could create a book of stories of our own activism that was just as full as this. But I happen to have done this. Oh, the one thing I did want to say was, if you happen to belong to a group that you think, another group that might like an evening of stories, do let me know, and we'll set up another group. It doesn't have to be a church; it could be a reading group or a work group or some other group, if that would be fun for you. Anyway, let me read you one more story from the book. This one is called "It's Okay to Show Some Emulsion." The 2005 Conservative Party election campaign was the dirtiest of my lifetime. The Tories had been out of power for a decade and they were desperate. They ran with the umbrella slogan, "Are you thinking what we're thinking?" Which, come to think of it, we might as well fix as the compulsory message for all the parties at all the elections. That way we could have it printed up on posters and just bring them out every 5 years. I was particularly aware of how dirty the campaign was because I had accidentally found myself standing for Parliament as the Labour candidate for Hazel Grove constituency. I say accidentally because I'd been selected by the unanimous vote of the 8 members of the local party. That in itself was quite remarkable, as one of the 8 had been standing against me. When it came to it, it seems he didn't have the confidence to vote for himself, but that's another story later in the book. Jane and I had recently moved to South Manchester, to a colourful multicultural community where Bangladeshi, Pakistani, English and Irish cultures mix together in a glorious soup. Michael Howard's Conservatives ran a highly divisive campaign. As a result, we woke up to find that the billboard high on the railway bridge beside our house had been plastered with a huge poster. A plain white background with black lettering 3 feet high proclaimed, "It's not racist to impose limits on immigration." I was outraged. It may or may not be racist to impose limits on immigration, but to put that poster high on a railway bridge in a multicultural community was clearly a dog whistle intended to cast immigrants as a problem to which a Conservative government was the solution. I imagined how that would feel to people from non-English cultures as they saw the message every day. Every time I walked under the bridge, it made my blood boil. Fed up with a boiling husband, the ever-practical Jane asked me what I planned to do about it. And so a plan was hatched. We realised that there was only one word on the poster that we had a problem with, the word "not." And it occurred to us that with a pot of white paint and a roller, we could correct it for them. That's how, at 1 a.m, the parliamentary candidate for Hazel Grove and his wife were seen walking along a street in South Manchester with a ladder, a paint roller on the end of a broomstick, and a large bucket of emulsion left over from doing the kitchen ceiling. We had all the ingredients for a Laurel and Hardy tribute act. For a middle-class boy from Croydon, it felt incredibly furtive to be carrying a ladder at dead of night. I was dreading a police car driving past and stopping us to ask what we were doing. I could see the headlines on the next day's papers. Election candidate caught, well, doing what exactly? Breaking and entering? Snooping into upstairs windows? No, officer, we were just taking the ladder out for some fresh air. When we got to the bridge, we realised the job was going to be more difficult than we'd anticipated. First, the poster was considerably higher than the ladder. And second, the billboard was surrounded by an 8-foot-high metal fence with spikes on the top. Even to get close to the poster, we'd need to scale the fence and drop down to the other side, somehow bringing the ladder and the paint over with us. And third, the poster was floodlit. We were going to have to do all of this in full West End lighting. We propped the ladder against the fence, and I climbed up, shielding my eyes from the glaring lights. Carefully negotiating the spikes, I balanced on top of the fence. I reckoned I could drop down onto the grass below without getting hurt. Jane could pass the roller through the fence, but the paint would have to follow me over the top. Jumping off an 8-foot fence is one thing. Jumping off an 8-foot fence with a bucket of emulsion is going the full Chuckle Brothers. Then we realised that if Jane kept the paint bucket on her side, she would be able to load up the roller, then pass it through the fence. This might just work. While I balanced on the top of the fence, Jane pushed the ladder up the outside, then pivoted it over the spikes and let it down the other side. I slid down the inside of the fence. Success! I was now inside the metal cage with the roller and the ladder. My wife was on the outside with a bucket of white paint. Momentarily, it occurred to me that if Jane wanted to get revenge for the last 25 years of marriage to me, this was probably the best opportunity she would ever get. I opened the ladder to its full length and propped it up against the hoarding. It was a ridiculously steep angle. I'm not that good with heights. Jane loaded the paint roller and passed it through the fence. I climbed the ladder. Even at the very top, with my arm extended over my head and holding the very end of the pole, I could only just reach the word "not." To get the paint to cover the word, I had to bounce on the ladder. I didn't dare look up, and anyway, the light was blinding me, so I just took a rough aim, looked at the ground, and by a sort of bobbing motion, aimed the roller at the word "not." I could feel the watery paint running down the pole of the roller, over my hand and down my sleeve. Splashes of paint dripped onto the back of my head. I had a fresh appreciation of the way Banksy suffers for his art. We reloaded the roller 2 or 3 times for good coverage. Each time I had to descend the ladder and climb up again. Then, more from exhaustion than completion, we decided to call it a night. I passed the roller back through the fence, climbed over and pulled the ladder back. Then we walked home again and fell into bed feeling we'd made our stand against white nationalism. When I got up in the morning, I walked out to the scene of the crime. The cheap paint had run down the poster, as if some enormous bird had dumped a watery load on it. The word "not" was still clearly visible, if a little greyer. It's not racist to impose limits on immigration. It's not sensible to climb a ladder with a pot of paint in the middle of the night either. But some things just have to be done. Thank you. That's the end of that story.
Thank you.
Now, Rob, I wonder if this would be a good moment to open up the everybody's microphones, because if anybody wanted to ask something or say something or throw something, this would be a great moment to do that.
There's a question from Claire. Sorry, I will see if I can unmute everybody. I'm not sure I can. I can mute everybody. I can't unmute you. You'll have to mute yourself. Unmute yourself. But Claire has a question which she put on chat. So Claire, if you'd like to ask that would be brilliant.
So my question is about the stereotype of Anglicans and how we're not known for radical acts like scaling fences and painting over offensive signs. Do you, Andrew, think that the stereotype has any merit? And if you do, what can we do to apart from write books and share acts of radicalism by people who subscribe to Anglican faith, what can we do to challenge that stereotype?
That's very interesting, Claire. Thank you for asking that. I have a bit of an odd view of the Church of England, because although I've worked in Anglican churches over the years, I now belong to a different sort of a church, and a lot of my work is with helping people who've been hurt in the Church of England. And a lot of my work has been in the media, where we kind of take a kind of secular view of the church. And my honest answer is that if I'm truthful, I think most people in Britain haven't got a clue what an Anglican is. They don't know who their vicar is, or what diocese they live in, or who their bishop is, or what on earth it's got to do with anything. So I'm not sure there is much of a stereotype of an Anglican, except possibly what people get from television programs like Rev or the Vicar of Dibley. I think, there's bad news in that, because the Church of England has lost most of the mission opportunity that came from being known everywhere. But the good news is that if Anglicans do things that are remarkable, they'll get noticed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a question or a comment that they'd like to ask? Oops, sorry, Claire, we've gone back to Claire. I was hoping to have a gallery view. Maybe I can do that. There we are. Anybody else like to ask a question? Please wave if you'd like to. Trish.
Evening. I just wondered, Andrew, how much of what you do is premeditated and how much is spontaneous? Because I think sometimes we might think of something that we could do, and then all those other thoughts about, oh dear, what if someone's watching me, or come into play, and we would then perhaps not do the act of activism.
Thanks, Tricia. I think I'm not very good at thinking ahead. I'm not very good at leaving myself enough time to decide that wouldn't be sensible. I'm much more apt to do something before I've put myself off the idea. And I think I want to encourage other Christians, well, not just Christians, but other people also to do that, to think of that thing that you think you might be being prompted to do and go and do it. And sometimes you'll find it lands you in trouble, and as it has for me sometimes, and sometimes you'll find that it makes a difference. I've worked quite a lot in media and communications in my career, and I've spent a lot of time helping organizations either to get themselves in the media or to avoid being in the media if they didn't want to be. And lo and behold, the one thing that pitches me into the media more than anything else I'd ever done in my life was something that just happened one morning and I wasn't even expecting it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be said for doing what you feel prompted to do, for tiny acts of mischief, rebellion, love.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you.
Verity is waving, or has she just burnt herself on the iron?
I'm waving.
No,
but I'm just trying to remember how to get the little yellow hand up.
Do you want to ask a question, Verity?
Yeah, I would. I'm wondering, can you recommend any sort of spiritual disciplines to help us get more mischievous?
I'm the least disciplined person you've ever met.
But what I mean is, how do we get our imaginations going? Are there things, should we watch more stand-up comedy or drink more wine? Or read
I do both of those. I do a lot of both of those. So I commend both of those. Actually, there is something there is a story I could tell you that I think might answer that a bit. So shall I do that?
Right.
This is not so much a story. This is in between the stories, there are one or two bits of explanation. And this is the one that comes at the end of the book. It's called Faith, Hope and Mischief. And it might explain a bit of where I'm coming from in answer to Verity's question. Is that okay? Everyone want to kind of sit back, get comfortable, top up with wine, go to the loo, whatever it takes. This is Faith, Hope and Mischief. Laughter is infectious. However bad the joke, if someone is really creased up, it's almost impossible not to laugh with them. It's a big mistake to try to do religion, politics, activism, or sex without laughter. Take Julian of Norwich, the 14th century mystic who was, as far as we know, the first woman to write a book in English. Julian was an anchoress, meaning that she spent her life alone, voluntarily walled up in a cell. Here, where she was extremely sick and expecting to die, she had a vision of the love of God. It hardly sounds like comedy gold, does it? But in her vision, she says, "I laughed mightily, and that made all those who were with me laugh also, and their laughing made me happy. I wanted all of my fellow Christians to see what I had seen, so they could all laugh with me. But I did not see Christ laugh, for I saw that our laughter is for our own comfort, rejoicing in God that the devil is overcome." What seems to have set Julian of Norwich off here is a radical vision that in the end, good has and will overcome evil. It's a theme repeated in her writing, and it goes well beyond mere hope. This isn't the hollow cackle of an empty universe, but the joyous belly laugh of someone who's just worked out how the world's joke ends. I want to laugh, and I want to change the world. There are a number of reasons for this. The main reason is that I've lived long enough and travelled widely enough to know that the world is grotty. More than that, the world is seriously messed up, trashed, unfair, and full of sadness and disappointment. Every one of us has to find a way of dealing with that fact. There are essentially only two options. One way is to insulate yourself from as much of the horror as you can. That's not easy to do in a highly connected age where news reaches us from every corner of the world faster than Usain Bolt can run. We tend to be aware of tragedies within minutes, even if they've happened the other side of the world. What's more, all the tragedies are mixed up. A devastating hurricane can sweep across a vast swathe of Asia, killing tens of thousands and leaving communities devastated. The 10 o'clock news may cover it for 3 or 4 minutes, provided there are pictures to illustrate the item. Then the next item on the bulletin may be the anguish of a child's death from neglect or disease, much closer to home. The stories are on a wholly different scale. Every death is equally tragic, but edited together, they make a brown mess of heartbreaking calamity that seeps into my soul and makes the world seem cruel. And even as I watch the news bulletin, I know that there's not a single thing that I can do to make life better, either for the grieving parents of the child or for the thousands affected by the hurricane. So for the sake of my soul, to enable me to get through the day at all, I insulate myself against it. I don't do that by avoiding the news altogether. That seems to me to be a form of betrayal, but I have to do something to cope. I simply don't have enough emotional battery life to feel all the things that would be appropriate to feel in response to all these disasters, especially as I haven't yet processed the disasters I heard about yesterday and the day before. So instead of closing my eyes and turning away, I learned to dial down my emotional response. Now, after 50 years of learning about the devastating awfulness of so much that happens around the world, I'm able to hear about agonizing grief, unbearable disasters, and insufferable injustice, and still go on to watch a comedy program or make spaghetti or pet the dog as if nothing much has happened. I'm not saying this with any sense of pride. In fact, I'm saying it with shame. But in practice, this is how I make the world's tragedy tolerable, by allowing it into my soul in only a homeopathic dilution. What else am I to do? Still, I want to change the world. Is that so much to ask? The second reason why I want to change the world is that I want it to be better for my children and for their children and so on. I'm not selfish enough to want it better only for my children, but I don't like to imagine that with all the knowledge we have of human psychology and all the technology we have available to us, the world that they inhabit in, say, 50 years' time will be just as grotty as the one that we have today. I want to think that the world is on a path of improvement. Unfortunately, the realist in me knows that this isn't the way things go. I distinctly remember my physics teacher telling me at school that by the time I was 30, all human beings would be issued with jetpacks so that we could transport ourselves from place to place. Well, Mr. Hall, not only were you wrong about the jetpacks, but have you seen the traffic on the M60? Also, when I was 20, I genuinely thought that within my lifetime, the appalling patriarchal bias that my generation inherited would be done and dusted, and there would be equality between the sexes. How wrong was I? 50 years on, it feels as if that dial hasn't shifted much at all. So I'm not optimistic about the short-term future. My desire to make the world better for my children and grandchildren is simply based on the fact that I feel like my generation hasn't been that impressive at tackling the challenges we were set. And the very least I want to do is make sure the next generation has a better shot. The third reason why I want to change the world is entirely selfish. I want to be significant. I don't want to feel like I've passed through the world without making a mark. Something inside me says that this whole thing will be worthwhile if I can make some definite improvement. I'm not looking for much, a cure for cancer perhaps, or an end to world hunger. I'm not picky. But I do want to tip the world's seesaw in the direction of good, even if it's just by a couple of degrees. To be frank, that part of me mostly wants to make the world better so that I can feel better about myself. I'm being really honest with you here. I want to do something great to validate myself. The more I burden myself with the idea that I should change the world, the more I find myself pitched against the world's built-in powers. For a start, changing the world starts to look like a race against time. When I was 20, it all looked perfectly feasible. I had ages to make a difference. Now I'm almost 60 and confidently past half time. I feel like the clock is against me. I don't want to wholly abandon the idea of changing the world, but nor do I want to succumb to a feeling of hopelessness as the window of opportunity slowly closes. It's not only time that's against me either. If my settled purpose is to change the world, I'm really going to need to accumulate quite a lot of raw power. I'm well aware that to change the world, you either need to have a vast brain so that people will bow to your superior intellect, or you need to have political influence so you can get things done on a national or preferably a global level, or you need to have enough money to buy the change you want to see. Stephen Hawking had a huge brain. Greta Thunberg has massive political influence. Bill Gates has almost limitless supplies of cash. I haven't got any of those, and I haven't really got enough time left to get them. But I still want to change the world. Recently, a friend of mine who is a prominent campaigner told me that if I want to make a difference, I need to build my personal brand. What he meant was that I need to leverage whatever power or personality I have through social media, through writing, through my friendships and contacts, to make sure that I'm projecting myself into the world in a way that I choose and a way that people will take notice of. I see lots of people who are prominent in public life who do just that. They take great care about the ways they present themselves, and by doing so, they build a platform from which they hope to do great things. But what if the best way to change the world is not through collecting power, but through rejecting it. This runs counter to everything I was taught at school and also to all the hidden assumptions I've picked up along the way. What if the best way for an everyday activist like you or me to exercise power is sometimes to get out of the way? A few weeks ago, a female friend told me something that blew my socks off. She simply described to me her experience of walking down a busy street. She told me that all the time she walks through a crowd, she is pausing, dodging, and moving out of the way to avoid bumping into people. She said this is an experience shared by lots of other women. Men simply expect to be able to walk in a straight line. My friend actually said that she had tried as an experiment to walk down a street the way that men do, looking confident and not moving aside for anyone. She found that she was bumping into people all the time because they expected a woman to get out of their way. At first I was dubious. I'm 59 now, and I've been walking on busy streets since I was about 18 months old. I don't think I'm a pavement bully, and I couldn't believe that I'd missed something so obvious. So for a few weeks, I tried to observe how men and women negotiate busy places, and I discovered that my friend is right. On average, men seem to walk in straight lines, whilst women have to dodge and weave. I've since noticed the same thing in children's playgrounds and in supermarkets too. One of my most profound values is that women and men are created as equals. That's a challenge in a world where men still have all sorts of advantages just because we are men. In our society, men disproportionately occupy senior jobs, which means that we have proportionally higher pay than women, and that's just the start of it. Imbalance runs through society, from the office block to the pavement, and from the Houses of Parliament to the playground. Putting radical equality into practice in an unequal world will be uncomfortable. In my experience, it's hard enough to deal with inequalities that stare us in the face. It's much harder to tackle the privileges we aren't even aware of, like having priority on the pavement. I'm encouraged when I see young, gifted women supporting and encouraging each other to take on public roles. If we're going to make progress toward the goal of valuing both genders equally, women will need to find courage to step into roles that may be unfamiliar. They'll need to deal with the imposter syndrome that says they're occupying a space where they really don't belong. But if women need to do some unfamiliar things to challenge the way the world thinks, so do men. When I was in my 20s, I really thought we'd have the problem of gender inequality sorted in my lifetime. Now I'm less hopeful. The most significant thing that men like me can do is quite simple, but also very challenging. Get out of the way. It's the exact opposite of building your personal brand. It might mean turning down invitations to lead and recommending women who could do the job just as well. It might even mean saying no to a promotion at work if the other candidate is female. Or it might be something as simple but radical as walking down the pavement more thoughtfully to make space for women to walk in straight lines. The three things that characterize an everyday activist are faith, hope, and mischief. By faith, I mean deciding to believe that there is a big picture that governs history. The opposite of faith is not doubt. Faith and doubt play for the same team. The opposite of faith is cynicism, which is to be avoided at all costs. By hope, I mean choosing to believe that, despite a lot of evidence to the contrary, the world's story is going to end well. The opposite of hope is not pessimism. Pessimism may well be the most realistic stance in any given situation. The opposite of hope is giving up. I'm not giving up. By mischief, I mean that instead of being immobilized by my impotence or insignificance, I look for creative, joyful, cheeky, unorthodox ways to shift the status quo. I am an everyday activist, and this is my creed. I believe in the power of tiny acts to change the world. I believe in taking risks, making trouble, and doing small things that make a big difference. I believe in walking under ladders, treading on the cracks in the pavement, and singing into the wind. I believe in bursting bubbles and poking fun at the overmighty, especially if the overmighty is myself. I'm not all powerful so that I can solve the world's problems or even my own problems. But I'm not completely powerless either. There are things that I can do. I can't take responsibility for everything, not in my work, not in my community, not in my family. But that doesn't mean I have to wash my hands of everything either, as if it doesn't matter what I do. I am imperfect, but I'm not useless. I'm an everyday activist. I'm not everything that I could be, but I'm not nothing either. Somewhere in between those two false ideals is the place where I live. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. That was great. Should we see if there's a couple more questions? You up for that?
Let's see if one or two people want to ask anything, if you would like to. And then I'll perhaps end with a very, very short little story, a 1 minute story to send us on our way. I noticed a comment from Lindsay. Lindsay around? I can't see you on Zoom.
That's all right. I was editing and copying and pasting, and I sent it by mistake.
Oh, don't mind.
I was thinking about Mischief and play.
Okay. Do you want to ask it?
No, I was more thinking it, and then I was typing it in my other bit, and I pasted it by mistake, and then tried to edit it, and it went.
Lindsay, it's a great comment and a great thought that could really help us. So I think possibly if you can expand a little bit, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
No, I just see them being very connected, like the mischievous child, how that mischief comes from play and adventure and seeking and looking differently.
Yes. Often we think that being a Christian is about conforming. I'm not sure it is actually at all. Certainly not in the life of Jesus. It was St. Paul who talks about faith, hope, and love in the letter to the Corinthians. Now, my book's called Faith, Hope, and Mischief. I hope that's not too sacrilegious, but I think there's a real connection between mischief and love. I think they're almost the same thing in the right hands, because love is doing things that don't make sense for the good. You don't love somebody because they're lovable. You don't love somebody because they deserve it. You love somebody out of a sense of recklessness and playfulness and mischief and rebellion. I would want to encourage 1,000 tiny acts of mischievous love. And we're all capable of that. There's nothing special about any of us. We've all got that in us.
Thank you.
Our 11-year-old daughter's best bit of her day today was some of her friends found a tiny little crack in the lockers at school, and they posted a little note.
Oh, sorry,
You've muted me.
I'm sorry. I was trying to pin you.
They posted a note.
They posted a note into her locker, and I can't. What did it say? It wasn't anything. It was just kind of saying, hello, Esther. But the fact that it was this kind of mischievous post-it love letter into her locker when she wasn't expecting it absolutely made her day. And I just think it's a tiny little, we could all do that to each other.
That's beautiful. That's lovely. I like her already.
Well, it's her friends. We like them too.
Yeah.
We could leave notes and books in libraries as well, couldn't we?
Brilliant. I love it.
Yeah,
good
and kind of
idea.
leave some money for the person in the toll, in the car behind you type thing, in the toll booth, that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Leave the pound coin in the trolley when you go to the supermarket. Oh, actually, I can't even remember going to supermarkets these days. You remember supermarkets and the trolleys and back in the days when we all used to go out? Do you remember out?
Or even pound coins.
Yeah.
Yeah, the COVID situation gives a whole new kind of challenge of how to be creatively mischievous in this setting. Is
We need to keep being creative, don't we?
Imaginative.
Well, I think we're probably drawing towards the end of our time. I'm contractually obliged by my publishers to mention the book is available. It's called Faith, Hope and Mischief. You can get it from Amazon and Canterbury Press and Waterstones and all those places. There's even an audio version of it, if that's your thing. If you do happen to belong to another group and you think that group would like to have a little evening like this, let me know, let Rob know, and we could easily set that up and do the hosting. But for now, I want to say thank you very much. And I'll just end off with a very short little story to send us off to our beds with.
Fantastic.
This is a story called A Bird in the Hand. The other day, a tiny bird flew in through our bedroom window. I got the shock of my life, and so did the bird. I was just standing there when suddenly it arrived, perched on the window frame for a moment, then dropped like a stone and started flapping around on the bedroom floor. I don't know which of us was more surprised. The poor little thing was panicking. It obviously hadn't got a clue what to do, and to be honest, neither did I. So I did what I usually do in moments of crisis. I called my wife. She picked the bird up, softly cupping it in her hands, and gently lifted it up to the open window. It was flapping like mad. Once her hands were outside the window, she opened them flat. The bird stopped flapping for a moment and just waited. It was almost as if it needed a moment to get its thoughts together. Then it launched off and flew away. Later on, I wondered what the bird made of the experience. What did it tell its parents when it got back to the nest? All right, I might be getting a bit Walt Disney here. David Attenborough would probably tell you that birds aren't as philosophical as all that. But I wondered whether it had any sense of having been rescued, held, delivered by something bigger than itself. There's something curious about that sense of being held in hands that are much bigger than your own, hands that could crush you, but instead choose to support you. Some people call that faith. I don't know whether birds have the capacity to feel grateful. Probably not, but I know that humans do, and I am. I hope that little bird goes through life with a nagging sense that there is something bigger, much bigger than itself, and that once upon a time, something that could easily have harmed it actually helped it instead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for being with us. It's been lovely, and I think you've given us loads to think about and done so in a way that is gently challenging and mischievous. And I think there's stuff from that I'm sure a lot of us will remember. For will come back to us.
It's been a pleasure, and I promise you that the very next time I find myself passing through Portishead, I will call in on you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheaper than Gordano services.
God bless you.
God bless you, Andrew.
Bye-bye.
And, God bless you, everyone. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
It's gone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay, find a bottle of wine.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rob.